Hey guys, how's it going? Alex Scott here with Consordini.com. Thanks so much for checking out another one of our videos. In this video, I've got a really quick kind of tutorial for users of Studio One on how we can emulate a more traditional analog workflow using some special plugins within Studio One. What we're really going after with this whole approach is not just worrying about EQ, not just worrying about compression. We're worrying about that extra kind of character and glue that you get on a lot of those big studio classic records. We think about like Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, the Beatles, all these like classic rock records, Rush, really anything, you know, like that was done back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and has that amazing classic sound to it. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with the performances and the instruments, the players, as well as the songs themselves. But another big part of it is that, A, they were using all analog gear, but there's two main components in our modern digital studio that are the hardest things to integrate, the hardest things to use, and that the fewest people have. The first thing is a large format mixing console, like a Neve or an API or an SSL mixing console. That's part of the sound because of how the summing works. Again, watch our video on the Ctc One Console Shaper for more information about that. The other thing is a big multi-track tape machine, a big 24-track like an Atari or a Studer tape machine, right? That they would use to actually record the music. They didn't have computers and DAWs back in the day, so they would use these big tape machines. And tape has its own sound. You'll know there's a lot of studios even today who maintain these tape machines that are 30, 40, even 50 years old and still use them to make records to this day, and that's because tape has a certain sound. So those are the two components that we're really looking at, is a multi-track tape machine and a large format console. So the first thing that you're going to need is the Ctc One Console Shaper. Now this is something directly from Presonus that is designed to integrate into the MixFX architecture within Studio One. We're going to talk a lot about that. This is $80 and is available from Presonus's website. Now an important note, if you do not use Studio One, you cannot use Ctc One. It is only for the MixFX architecture within Studio One. It's very, very important. If you use a different DAW, unfortunately, this is not going to work or be available for you. But that's the first thing we're going to want to have. Again, $80, and we have a review of this on the channel that's either already been posted or will be posted soon. This is an amazing little thing. You guys are going to see what it does a little bit in this video, but I've got a much longer, more detailed review about it and how it works and how MixFX works. That's going to be a great compendium to this video, so head over to our channel and definitely watch that because there's going to be a lot of good information in there as well. But regardless, Ctc One Console Shaper, very important. The other thing that you're going to need is this plugin, which is called Tape from the guys at Softube. Now, I love Presonus, I love Softube. I use the Softube Console One in my mixing workflow extensively. It is one of my favorite devices, one of my favorite plugins. I have all their add-on channel strips for it. But if you subscribe to Softube Volume 4, their plugin bundle that is available on a subscription basis, you're going to have this tape plugin. And as a cool kind of bonus, this is a plugin that will work in any DAW. It's just a VST plugin. And on its own, tape is really just meant to be a 2-track tape machine, so we can kind of put it on our master bus. I have one here. We're not going to be using this one necessarily as much. It's kind of the finishing step in our process. But on its own, again, it's really meant to just kind of emulate like a 2-track stereo tape machine. However, when you use Softube's Volume 4 plugins within Studio One, you also get this thing called Tape Multitrack, which takes advantage of Studio One's MixFX architecture, much like Ctc One Console Shaper does, and allows us to get a multi-track, like a 24-track or 16-track tape machine sound, okay? So, talking about this MixFX architecture is kind of the next thing, because we have to understand what it's doing in order to understand how this is creating that classic workflow. And what MixFX does is it allows us to use these special plugins to affect not just what they're on. So when we think of like a normal compressor plugin or something, you put it on a channel or on a bus, it affects that channel or it affects that bus. The MixFX plugins actually allow us to affect not only the one channel, but everything within the bus itself. So like, let's scroll over to our drum bus here, right? Now, on our drum bus, you'll see that I have all these drum mics. We have a kick, we have snare top and bottom, toms, overhead, left and right. And all of these are a part of my drum bus. Well, if I were to just stick a compression plugin or even a tape emulation plugin, because lots of people make tape emulation plugins, it's just going to affect this one bus, right? It's just going to affect kind of the summarized sound of everything. However, with MixFX, it actually allows it to reach out and affect independently and directly all of the channels within the bus. So it's sort of like, in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tracks on a bus. It's like having 8 plugins, or I guess in this case it would be 7 plugins within one, because it's not just an effect that's loaded on the bus. It's actually going through and it's applying the effect to each of these tracks separately that are within our bus, okay? So it's working exactly like a real tape machine would, where each track is going to have a little bit of tape saturation on it. And crosstalk, between the channels. Again, watch the Ctc One video. I talk about crosstalk in a console. Crosstalk with tape machines works exactly the same way. It's a little bit of interference track to track, where you can hear the track next to it playing. If you just solo it, if we solo our kick drum mic, we'd hear a little bit of the snare drum because it would be on the next lane of tape, the next track of the tape machine. It helps to glue the signal together, and it's a very subtle and kind of non-linear thing. Again, just watch the Ctc One video. But it allows us to treat our session as if it's been tracked on a real 24-track tape machine, is really what the fundamental thing that we want to get to here. And the tape plugin itself, we definitely have lots of presets. I really like this hardware clean master. It doesn't even really matter as much what you do. You can tweak everything to your particular liking. We have a lot of options here. We have coloration, 3 different types of tape, whether it's emulating a 30 inch per second, 15, 7.5 inch per second tape machine. I'm probably going to do a separate video review of this tape plugin as well, because it's awesome in its own right. But the thing that we're mainly concerned with here is that it's just doing a great job of creating our tape sound. So let's hear just our drum bus with and without this tape multitrack. And again, I'm just going to use a preset, and we're going to use this hardware clean master preset, okay? So let's listen. Here's without. And here it is with. Now, it's very subtle. But this whole approach that we're doing is not, when you listen to the individual parts, it's not a huge change. The change comes when you stack everything together. Now, we can use this tape plugin to do some crazy stuff. We can crank our input gain and make it totally distorted. We don't necessarily want to do that. You can if you want to, but I like to, like the preset has it, we can pick some slightly different coloration. We can push our input a little bit harder. There it is without, and with. Very subtle, very kind of gluey, just warms it up a little. It gives it a bit of more of a tape vibe, which is very cool. The thing that we're thinking about here is not just doing this one thing to drums to make the drums themselves sound better. That's not the idea here. We're emulating an entire workflow. So again, grabbing a preset here for our drums, we're going to take that preset, we're going to apply it to every bus that I have in my session. Now you'll notice I have all of the channels in my session. All my vocals are going to a bus, and I already have that preset applied to all of these tape instances of tape multitrack. So I have a vocal bus. All of my vocals are being bused to this. We have tape multitrack. It's affecting all of these vocal channels with the tape effect. Background vocals, organ, piano, acoustic, electric, and bass guitars. I've already done our drums. And then tambourine and shaker are a part of our drum bus as well. So now we have these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 instances of tape multitrack. And that is effectively giving us the sound of a 24-track tape machine across all of the channels in our session. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hear before and after. I've removed everything from my master bus, and we'll hear the entire session first without.
Just because you try.
And here it comes.
Doesn't mean you'll never know why. Even if you break out, doesn't mean you won't be left out. Just because you try.
And again, as I'm checking this box, that's enabling all the instances of tape multitrack. So you can hear it's not super obvious, but it's also doing a lot at the same time. It's kind of interesting. It brings out a little bit of top end. It gives everything a nice saturation. It tightens up the low end, and it evens out the mids. And it feels almost like it's applying a little bit of gentle compression, which tape does. There's a thing called tape compression. That's one of the reasons that people really love tape. So that's the tape half of our situation. Now we're going to bring in the Ctc One Console Shaper. And again, I'm not going to talk a ton about this right now. Please do go watch the dedicated video about this where I go on about it for about 20 minutes. It's an amazingly cool plugin. But suffice to say, if you've watched that video, you know what everything does and you know how it sounds. So we're now just going to bring this in. And, you know, again, we have a crosstalk option here that's going to do stuff with our kind of the glue and the stereo image. We're going to put our character at about 2, and I am going to use this tube version, which is the Abbey Road Red series console emulation. We're going to put our drive right at about noon. And this now, the CTC One, as we say in the, as we talk about in the review of it, it's affecting these buses. So on each bus, we've got the tape machine that's affecting the channels within the bus. Then on our master, we've got the CTC One, and that's affecting our buses, because the whole point of CTC One is that it's emulating the summing architecture, what we call the summing architecture of a console, which is how the console combines all the buses and all the tracks together into our stereo output. And so it's handling our buses and our summing, and then the tape multitrack is handling the individual channels. So here it is now with everything, including CTC One. Again, we're using the tube console emulation.
Just because you try
Without,
doesn't mean you'll never know why. Even if you break out, doesn't mean you won't be left out. Just because you try.
so you see what I mean? Now that we've got all the instances of tape and the instance of CTC One, now we're starting to get the full picture. It does a ton. It's evening out the sound. It's bringing out detail on the top end. It's giving everything this really nice polish and glue. And this whole song, by the way, mind you, I can't remember if I've already mentioned this song is totally dry. It's essentially unmixed. There's no reverb, there's no delay, there's no EQ, there's no compression on anything in this entire song right now. So we're just hearing strictly the tape and the CTC. And that's one of the really cool things about working this way and kind of trying to emulate this really classic old school sound, is because it actually gets you further along in your mix very quickly and very easily. It helps to glue things. It helps to give things a subtle kind of compression and EQ so that you have to do less. You're not constantly fighting with each tiny little individual fiddly element and trying to get everything to sit. It just helps to glue everything together right off the bat so you can dive in, and then you're just more focused on getting everything to sound good and not everything to sit correctly and sound finished. It already kind of, is headed in that direction when we work this way. Now, the final thing that we can do, because we already have the tape plugin kind of in its standalone version and in the multi-track version, is we can put the standalone version on our master output. So I'm going to go in here, we're going to open up tape, and we're just going to use that same master, clean master setting. And of course, we can play around with this. We can drive it a little bit harder, not as hard. We can control how much it's affecting the top end, what kind of tape formulation we're using, quote unquote. But ultimately, it's just kind of the final step in what you would do 30 years ago with a mix, is you would print it to a master machine, a master 2-track, like half-inch tape machine. And that's kind of now what we're simulating in the final step of this workflow. So just again, now with that final little addition, here's without.
Just because you try,
Here it comes.
doesn't mean you'll never know why. Even if you break out, doesn't mean you won't be left out. Just because you
sounds great. It sounds really, 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 really cool. And it sounds really authentic to me, which is what I love about it. And what I love about tape and I love about Ctc One, all of the things that we're using here, all the things in question, sort of, they sound how they're supposed to sound. They sound very authentic. They sound very real. And they sound very analog. And it really, by the time you stack it all together, like this is a part of every mix that I do with this style of music. And I always start my mix this way by loading all this stuff up and saying, cool, this is our starting point. Because as you guys can hear, with all of it turned off, it sounds like an unmixed session in a DAW.
Just because you try doesn't mean you'll never know why.
There's no cohesion. Nothing's glued together. Everything sounds and feels like a separate element that has nothing to do with each other. And then when we turn all this stuff on, again, we have no EQ, no compression, nothing. Suddenly it starts to sound already like a record.
Just because you try doesn't mean you'll never know why.
Everything feels combined. Everything feels coalesced together in a really pleasing way. And to me, it's a much better place to start from in terms of then, we can just worry about a little bit of balancing and a little bit of flavor on each element with things like reverb, basic stuff. We don't have to fight to say, well, I've compressed and EQ'd and reverbed everything in the session. It still doesn't sound like a record. Why? It still sounds all separated. This kind of a thing is why. This is what gives us that final polish, that final combining. It's like a great, a crock pot or something where you put in all these elements and they come out as something better than the sum of their parts. So this is just, this is a workflow that I have developed actually pretty recently because I found out about the Console Shaper and I noticed the tape multitrack and I was reading a thing about the MixFX, which is a relatively new feature in Studio One. And also another thing that inspired it was, if you guys have seen, Universal Audio just released their own DAW called Luna. And Luna is free as long as you're a Universal Audio user and have one of their incredibly expensive interfaces and use their incredibly expensive plugins. Then you get this free DAW. And one of the perks of the DAW is that it works very much like this. It has a console emulation built in. It has a tape machine emulation built into it. And I was looking at it and going, God, that's really cool. That's brilliant. It made me want to get a Universal Audio interface and play around with Luna a little bit because it's like, those are things I've always wanted in my workflow. But tape machines are thousands of dollars. Consoles are hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. And these things require maintenance. You need all this cabling. It's, working on a tape machine is completely different than working on a DAW. It's way more complicated. You can't do any of the MIDI or arrangement stuff. It's a completely different way to make music. So it's like, well, I can either spend, $150,000 and completely relearn how to do my job and use the real stuff. I can go to this very specific niche DAW, but then I found out about MixFX and the fact that Studio One actually has already had all this built in for some time. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And now that I've really started using it and getting into it, it sounds great and it's become a very, very integral part of my workflow. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Again, I understand this isn't going to be super applicable to everybody because you do need a few of these more specialized plugins. You do need to be a Studio One user, but hopefully for some of you out there, if you want to put a little bit of cash into it, again, to get both of these plugins is less than $100 if you already own Studio One. Ctc One is $80, and then the tape multitrack, if you just get their subscription based, is I think $15 a month, $13 a month, something like that. So it's not massively expensive, and for what you get, it's really going to be something that takes your mixes to the next level and just become a very cool part of your workflow. You're going to sit down, you're going to start a mix, you're going to bust everything down and do this MixFX stuff, and you're going to get yourself a lot further along and give your mix a lot more character to start with and have to worry less about some of those ancillary things as you work through your mix. You're going to be able to just focus on getting the vocals sounded great, doing some of the more basic things, and then this glue is already going to be there. It's going to be built in from the beginning. So very, very cool. Sounds great. Highly recommend it. And I hope you guys have found this kind of tutorial helpful. But in any case, what do you guys think? Do you have any tips or tricks on how to make your mixes glue together better? If you guys do mixing, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. If you do, definitely let me know in the comments down below. Always love hearing from you. If you have not yet subscribed to Consordini, please do so. Really helps us out. And if you would like to give this video a like or a share, that would be fantastic as well. But in any case, my name is Alex Scott with Consordini.com. Thank you guys so very much for watching. I hope you found it interesting and helpful, and we will see you in the next video.